Not too long ago, in fact less than a week, none other than Lord Swen Vincke, CEO of Larian, tweeted out something very interesting. And I, frankly speaking, think it is a bit of a hint referring to something. Now you can see the image that he tweeted out along with his commentary, and it's very telling. Now, before proceeding, I will tell you that this is pure speculation. It is informed speculation, and I'm inferring certain things, but it is nonetheless speculation. So nothing I'm saying is meant to be a prophecy. I don't claim to have insider information. Just for the record, it is speculation. However, if you look at what he tweeted out, it tells you something's going on. They're working on something new. And he has indicated in the past, I think last month, that he'd already written some notes down for some project he was working on, ideally his next game. But when he tweets out something referring to the sound team, of all people, recording ice at night to avoid the sounds of cars and planes, that says something. The first question you might need to ask is, why would the sound team need to record ice? Well, if you step on ice, if you walk across ice, it makes a certain type of sound. But what does ice have to do with anything? Well, this is my informed speculation. Many of you might know, but many of you might not know, that in addition to Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, as well as Throne of Baal, being cult classics from the days of isometric games, the games that quite literally inspired the genesis and the creation of Baldur's Gate 3, there were other D&D games produced around that time, in that era. Specifically, Icewind Dale and Icewind Dale 2. One was produced in 2000 and the other in 2002, so roughly 20 years plus, 22 years ago. Now, Icewind Dale, beyond these games, has a fairly storied history. The first mention and appearance of this region, called Icewind Dale, is in a series of novels written in the late 80s by a very famous author, at least in the context of the Forgotten Realms, R.A. Salvatore, who wrote the Icewind Dale trilogy, The Crystal Shard, Streams of Silver, and The Halfling's Gem, respectively. And this was the first mention of the region called Icewind Dale. Eventually, you find out that there is a game coming out called Icewind Dale, quite successful for its time, and then Icewind Dale 2, which was also quite the success. Now, given the fact that Baldur's Gate 3, in many ways, is a legacy-type game, meaning it has built itself up on the foundations of previous games of the same genre, but more specifically, games taking place in the same region and same fantasy world, Faerun, in this case Baldur's Gate, I don't think it's too much of a stretch to suggest that maybe, just maybe, this next project that Larian is working on has something to do with Icewind Dale. There are a lot of reasons to think this. Number one is the very simple reason that Baldur's Gate 3 did exceptionally well. People had wondered whether or not Wizards of the Coast would green light another game. Wizards of the Coast is many things, but they're not complete fools, and they see the money on the wall, so to speak. And so they would almost certainly greenlight another title taking place in the Forgotten Realms. And the Icewind Dale games are cult classics in their own respect. Probably not to the same degree as Baldur's Gate was, but nonetheless, they are excellent games, still are. There's an enhanced edition of the first one, although there's none of the second. And I could easily see why Larian might have an interest in creating games taking place in this region. Now, for those of you who are not familiar, because I know there are a lot of people out there whose first experience in the Forgotten Realms, and in general with RPGs, is Baldur's Gate 3, well, Icewind Dale is a region in Faerun, in the northwest of the continent. The entire area itself is referred to as the North. It has a lot of important cities in it, including Neverwinter, which I'm sure you've heard of, as well as Waterdeep, and some others that are less well known, such as Silvery Moon. Now, Icewind Dale itself, this region, is in the far, far northwest. It is the most northern point in that entire region, and it is also the coldest, has the harshest climate, and so on and so forth. There are no real cities there, but there are several settlements and towns. These are referred to as the 10 Towns. Now, the games Icewind Dale and Icewind Dale 2, respectively, are very similar to Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, but also very different. They fall more into the genre of dungeon crawler. You don't have named companions, we'll talk about that in a bit, and you play an adventurer and/or adventuring group that is there to solve problems, mercenaries if you will. But that doesn't mean they don't have stories. Actually, the stories and plots in both 1 and 2 are quite good, quite well told, and interesting. It's just that you're less involved with named characters and more involved in combat and experiencing the adventure on its own. So that's the big difference between Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 and those old Icewind Dale games. That said, they use the same systems. There's a lot of overlap. Okay, now assuming Larian were working on their next title, which might be Icewind Dale, would they do the same thing? Would it be another epic dungeon crawler adventure with a good, robust plot and story nonetheless? Probably not. And here's the reason. You see, Larian tries to essentially please everybody. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's a large component of their success. And a dungeon crawler, I just don't think is something they would ever make. So, if they're making a new Icewind Dale, an Icewind Dale 3, no pun intended, because we do have 1 and 2, would it be simply an adventure with a plot? I really doubt that. For the simple reason that there are huge swaths of players who play Baldur's Gate 3, not for the adventuring, not for the combat, but rather as a dating simulator, or a social simulator, or a Sims-like game. And those people would have absolutely zero interest in a dungeon crawl. So that probably wouldn't be the thing. That said, they could still make a game with named companions, with elements similar to Baldur's Gate 3, that simply takes place in Icewind Dale. It is a completely different region. It is very different from Baldur's Gate, very different from the South, and it has its own issues and problems, as in terms of religion, in terms of peoples, in terms of conflicts. It's very interesting, and I, for one, love to see ice and snow. And so, having audio engineers record ice must tell you something, and it just seems to almost make logical sense after a Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 and now 3 that we could have an Icewind Dale 1, 2, and 3 as well. Now, there's another reason why this seems very plausible to me. Now, you might recall that much of the story in Baldur's Gate 3 builds off of this adventure module, Descent into Avernus. Well, a similar such module was published a few years back in no place other than Icewind Dale, and has its own very interesting story. You see, this module involves the goddess Auril, who is the goddess of cold and winter, and a very unpleasant one at that. And for whatever reason, after the Second Sundering, this event where many of the gods return, she has decided to stay in Faerun, which sort of depowers her on the one hand, but also allows her to have a more active hand in the events of the world. And in this adventure module, she has decided, for whatever reason, it's never really revealed to us, to keep the North in a perpetual blanket of snow, ice, wind, and most importantly, night. Just before dawn is about to occur, she will fly across the sky on a giant white rock, a giant bird basically, and cast a spell that prevents the sun from being seen. And so the region of Icewind Dale has been cast into a perpetual state of darkness, ice, cold, and winter. Pretty much ideal for the goddess of cold and winter, who is also very evil, by the way. Now, your job as an adventurer is to solve this issue. She has been depowered, essentially, so you eventually get to the point where you can actually defeat her. Whether she perishes permanently or not is a different story. And there's also to boot a whole story revolving around Netherese ruins that you can visit that have a lot of treasure and have their own magical secrets. So this could make logical sense if Larian decided, in much the same way they built off of the module Descent into Avernus, they decide to build off of this module, which is called Icewind Dale: Rime of the Frost Maiden. And these are the reasons why I think it is compelling, at least speculatively speaking, that Larian might in fact be working an Icewind Dale game, or a DLC. Now, I tend more to say game here, because it's hard to imagine the companions from Baldur's Gate 3 going to Icewind Dale to take care of things, although I suppose they could. That just doesn't seem very plausible. And then we have the other, you could argue, counter-evidence from Wither's Banquet, where a dark sun, i.e. Cyric, is referred to, which I think is a distinct possibility. Of course, I made a video about it. So, if I had to place bets, this is probably a new game. Now, of course, it could be something completely different. Swen Vincke has talked about his desire to make a science fiction game, and there are many worlds in the universe with snow and ice. Many people want a Divinity Original Sin 3, which he has said he wants to do as well, although it's many years away. So, again, pure speculation. But on the other hand, why would you post a photo and a comment like this on Twitter to a bunch of D&D aficionados who know the history, who know what games have been made, because everyone's going to think, just as I have, that he's referring to Icewind Dale. They're working on something that takes place in Icewind Dale. Anyway, what do you guys think? Do you think there's good evidence for this? Why else would Lord Vincke tweet this out? I personally don't think there's another good reason for it, but let me know what you think in the comment section. And as always, thank you for tuning in. If you like my videos, you can leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe. It'd be much appreciated. And until the next time, I will check you out then. Take care for now.